I define strategic partnership by when things go wrong, are we solving them together or are we solving them alone? And when we are solving them alone and we have a fear factor that we've created between us that there's a problem, we shouldn't talk about it, I just don't think that's for success. I mean, we all want to do a good job. I truly believe that. And strategic partner is working through the hard times and the good times.
Welcome, Econ Logistics Nation. We are recording live from Manifest 2026. Really excited to welcome Laura back on our podcast. Laura, the last time you were on the podcast, you were leading radio, and now you're the CEO of GEODIS Americas. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's really exciting to see you again and to talk to all your viewers.
I would love to start off by asking you about your journey. So, having led both radio and now GEODIS Americas, what's changed the most when it comes to how customers think about logistics, and how has it shifted since you stepped into the CEO role?
We talked a lot about what happened in the pandemic and how that shifted customers' expectations around speed and quality. But now I think what we're really seeing is a focus on balancing cost, speed, and quality. So they want to make sure that their customers a great experience. We know the cost of customer acquisition has increased exponentially. So the customer you have is the customer that you want to keep.
Right.
And so that's what we really hear the most is how do we delight our customers? How do we make sure that we keep them? What's unique about our delivery to them? And how do we do that in a sustainable way as well? So it's a lot to think about and to balance. And I think the way that you really get to understand that is getting to know your customer and getting to know their customer. So one of the things I love to do is when we work with a new partner, a new business, become a customer and try it out, see what the experience is like maybe before we start working together. And then I better understand their expectations because I'm a customer myself.
This is something that we've done quite a bit at Fulfillment IQ as well. Just do like a post-purchase experience type of audit. And one, you get to be their customer, so you get to try out the product, but you learn so much about like what is the email that they send when you initially place the order? What's the experience like when you're on the website? Is there any disconnect? Even in terms of obviously logistics, are there any steps along the way as a customer from the journey perspective that you might want to tighten, or you might want to give feedback in terms of, hey, you sent this email when something changed about the delivery. It would have been good if you just sent me an email, let me know. So little things like that go a long way. And I love that you're doing that because now you can compare it to how have things shifted now that there are customers.
That's right. And my team loves it because when they're the warehouse that's fulfilling me, and maybe there is something that we can do better, I'm kind enough to take a picture, send that their way, and make sure that we keep improving.
Yeah, I love that. Laura, I've always known you to be someone who is on the floor, operations first leader. So it aligns really well with your operating model and the way you view this business. I love the kind of insights you must be getting. You are in a seat where you tend to hear from customers what they think or what they hope for when they're being polite, but also when they're just being candid. I want to start there. A few years ago, again, you said cost and service levels were really important. Don't break my peak. Now, with all of the shifts that are happening, customers are also worried about how do I make sure that I can pivot if needed? How do you make sure that you service different types of customers, whether it be enterprise or high growth brands, in different ways, but support their goals and support their growth as well?
I think obviously the overused word of agility these days, right? How do we manage an uncertainty? How do we offer flexibility? And it goes back to some of the tried and true scenario planning that we used to do, right? So if there's a hiccup on the inbound supply chain, what do we do? How are we ready when that happens? If there's something that happened in the warehouse, take the massive snowstorm and ice storm that hit much of the U.S. at the last week of January, that just tests our skills to be able to say, okay, how quickly can you divert to warehouses that aren't closed or to transportation options that are still running? I really think about that. And as it relates to the high growth versus enterprise, it's about having a platform first. And by that, I don't mean something that's hard-coded to a specific way and you come here and you do it the way we like it or not.
Right.
But it's thinking about, we're the experts and what's that type of platform that we can offer that can be flexible for both people that are maybe in a high growth or less mature phase of their business and those enterprise customers who still expect the same, if not higher, quality, but we we really need to leverage that because the focus on cost is maybe not number one, but it is certainly never going to go away.
Absolutely.
And with all the escalators we saw, right, with rent, with labor costs that happened, we have to make sure that we stay efficient. So really for us, it's about building this platform and how do we make sure that platform can be agile to serve customers whatever phase of the business cycle they're in.
So maybe let's start by defining what is a high growth customer versus an enterprise customer. The two are drastically different, but let's maybe start with the definition first.
So for me, I went back to my business school book, right, and found the curve that shows that you have emerging businesses who are maybe starting early day, it could be early funding, and you have those growth brands who are really starting to hit scale. So they've maybe moved out of the basement into their first 3PL, but now they're really looking to say, we were doing 10,000 orders a day. All of a sudden we have to do 100,000, and that's really different. Versus enterprise customers who are billions in revenue and who have not necessarily consistent patterns because they could still be growing too,
Right.
but the scale at which that happens is often not the same, right? So as you think about like a peak to average business, you don't see as big as spikes. I also think the sophistication. So when we work with enterprise customers, they're going to have a transportation team, a planning team, a warehouse team, and some of our growth brands that are earlier in their life cycle, they can't afford all those people. You might be talking to employee two,
Right.
who their job is to take on the supply chain, but they're a product person.
Right.
And so how do we make sure that we can support them as well as we can support the teams?
The interesting thing about what you're saying, I know it sounds simple, but it's extremely difficult because supporting, again, enterprise teams versus high growth, it almost feels like you might need two different teams. I'd love to hear about what are the customer journeys and how do you kind of figure out what is needed to make those two types of customers extremely successful?
So I think about it as capabilities, right? So if we started to get into two different teams, then I potentially deleverage my solutions team, the engineering team, and all the expertise that we have. But if you think about the capabilities, so who on our engineering team is really flexible, who does better in the gray with customers who last year's forecast is not predictive of what this year will be,
Right.
and building flexibility. I just had a recent conversation with a high growth business and said, we can't write a deal for 3 years because we don't know
Right.
what will look like. And how do we both get comfortable knowing that we can live with that, right? Versus thinking about the more technical things that we're going to do for some of our enterprise clients who really want to drive efficiency, making sure that we're looking at things. The nice thing is, you have the growth companies who drive us to stay innovative. You have the enterprise companies who keep us on our toes, also around innovation, but certainly on efficiency and how we deliver value.
That's a great perspective. I want to talk a little bit about strategic partnerships. This is a term that gets used a lot, but in reality, when you look under the hood, the strategic partnerships are nothing more than certain SLAs that they want to meet. Maybe they'll have QBRs and just talk about, hey, this is what we were supposed to achieve. What happened doesn't truly feel strategic. How do you define strategic partnerships? And what are some examples, if you can share any, where you've seen this done really well in practice?
So I think a strategic partnership is really caring about the business. So I met with a recent customer and probably for an hour, we talked about their sourcing, how they're shifting their sourcing, some to Africa, some obviously to different places in Southeast Asia in response to the tariffs. And I think my team sat there thinking, what are we talking about, right? Like we do their warehousing in North America, so we're spending a lot of time, but really hearing about how they think about still delighting their customer, making sure it's a quality product, not sacrificing anything because of these changes that have to happen. To me, that's the part of the definition of strategic partnership, right? You really care about what they're doing and about what matters to them. And I think that's not necessarily how we architected this business to start, right? It was you cared because you delivered the SLA and you wanted to do right by the customer, but you do care about their business and their customer.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shift we have to make. I also think I define strategic partnership by when things go wrong, are we solving them together or are we solving them alone? And when we are solving them alone and we have a fear factor that we've created between us that, there's a problem, we shouldn't talk about it, I just don't think that's for success. I mean,
Absolutely.
we all want to do a good job. I truly believe that. And strategic partner is working through the hard times and the good times.
I love that definition because there's so much forethought and trying to add value in ways that is not customary, but meaningful to the other party. I think there's also an emphasis on long-term strategic partnerships, right? So rather than just thinking about here's what we deliver, it's more thinking about the big picture and what matters to your customers. And truly, I think that is such a wonderful way of looking at it because everybody can kind of rise together. Let's switch over to operations a little bit. We talked about planning for the future, and honestly, over the last year, even 5 years, no plans have worked out. Things have just been insane in our world. One of the most difficult, thing to kind of unwind is when you make an investment in technology or automation. How do you balance betting on something in the short term that gives you results, but is also resilient enough to show its value over 5 years, 10 years, depending on the investment that you're making? How do you think about that?
I've changed my thinking, right? So there was a period of time where we went through the automation craze and we thought this is really going to be the path to efficiency and to drive that. And what we learned is those big installations were not flexible. And so if a customer made a decision to insource, right, then here we were with a big automation solution that didn't work. So I think I might be going back a little old school and starting to think about how do we step into it in the right way? How do we remain agile and we add automation in to improve that agility rather than hard code it? I've spent a bunch of time on the floor at Manifest today talking with some new innovative robotics providers, technology providers who are really opening up different ways of thinking about that. When we go and look to finance a big automation project, we always say, oh, don't worry, we can use it again. And I'm not sure that sells so well, right? Because it's tough. I also think the other thing is we really have to solve the idea of multi-client solutions, and that would help with the automation. So if you really had a solution that you could use for 3 or 4 customers at the same time, and then maybe one customer decided to insource or to go somewhere else, you have the opportunity to slot them in. These installs that end up being very single-threaded, very customized, and perhaps they didn't need to be. We maybe got a little lost at the art of the engineering instead of what was the intended outcome. And it was probably to get the throughput that we needed, to go faster, to maybe reduce our reliance on people doing more of the mundane, right, so that they could do more of the thinking processes.
I love that. Maybe let's talk about what you've seen on the floor so far. Manifest is the biggest it's been. I love to see how many different companies are represented on the floor. What is something that stood out to you, or a few things that stood out to you, and what are you kind of keeping an eye on this year?
So there's an AI solution for everything, I've learned. So I've had the opportunity to speak with so many people who have creative ideas to solve each piece of it. With some customers, what we've been talking about is how do you stitch that all together? So it's almost going to be we talked about AI for orchestration. Who's going to orchestrate the AI so that we really keep an end-to-end supply chain, right? We can never divorce the physical from the digital. So we have to keep that together. We have to think about what those solutions look like and how they're going to work together. So I'll be curious. I was on a panel earlier with someone who said he solved it. I think we'll see. But I think that's been good. The other thing is just the positive momentum.
Yes.
I think when we were in Q4, we weren't sure, particularly for retail, what that would look like. I went to RILA last week. I'm at Manifest this week. And people are upbeat. And maybe it's because we finally accepted that, some of this chaos is the new normal. And we've dealt with a lot of chaos over the last 5 years. And we become more resilient in how to think about that. It's okay to not know. But people want to move forward now. Decisions that were put on hold in 25, we can't wait anymore to see. So it is then back to our conversation around automation. How can you do it so that you step into it, not maybe jump in with both feet and then say, oh.
Yeah. Things change very quickly and you need to be able to react in a way that is, materially, positively impactful to your business. So again, and that becomes really important. As you look at 2026, what is the biggest blind spot that you think customers still have when it comes to partnerships as well as execution when it comes to logistics?
I think it's still about what agility really means, right? And I've been teasing my team because they're things are so different. And I said, so I was in Reno yesterday. I'll be in some of our Las Vegas sites tomorrow. Have you guys you are in warehouses. They're not that much different, right? So the robots are different. The technology, the WMS is different. What I'm thinking about for 26 and beyond, what we won't even be doing in 28, 29, and 30? And how are we thinking about that now?
Right.
So I'm super focused on obviously executing 26, but the blind spot is, 30% maybe of the things that we do today for our customers will no longer be something they need from us.
Right.
So then what should we be doing? How do we think about that? How do we remain the value-added partner who's looking around those corners? Think about the talent, the capabilities that we'll need. Are we upskilling our team to do that? Are we creating bold new visions of the thinking that we expect from people? So I'm challenging myself to think about what does that look like? And I don't know the answer. And maybe that seems a little scary, but smart people like you and Nod will work together and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, warehouses, one of my favorite things is to be on the floor of a warehouse because there's just so much happening. And this is where the truth of our industry happens. But again, I think people aspect, and we've spoken about this before, is really difficult to solve for. But I think that there's something that we need to do a little bit more about because technology will continue to evolve. But people add something that is just so much, it just takes the customer experience or the strategic partnership to the next level. And it is not replicable. The moat is there. So again, the team that you have at GEODIS and the work that you guys are doing, we're seeing the implications of it and how the industry views it as well. Let's talk about what is it that you're optimistic about and what is it that you want to challenge in terms of maybe some solutions that you're seeing or what you're hearing right now in terms of hype.
So I'm optimistic. As I said, I think about where we're going. So we've had a rough couple years. I think it's going to continue to kind of be somewhat chaotic, but I do believe we have a resilient consumer who wants to continue to drive business. And that's going to be across verticals, right? Whether that's industrials, automotive, retailer, fast moving consumer goods. So I remain optimistic that we have a lot more to do. I've seen at the end of Q4 and the beginning of the year, a lot of activity picking up, right? With people moving forward and making decisions. I think the challenge is still going to be this uncertainty. We crave certainty in the supply chain. And I've heard people say their supply chain is still not where it needs to be from an inventory perspective. We had more inventory at the end of this year than we had the year before. So what does that look like? What does just in time mean anymore? How do we think about what that will look like go forward? Are we going to go through another tariff period where we go start, stop? So I think those challenges will continue. And again, it's going to be about this partnership to weather the storm, to make sure that we're thinking ahead, we're trying to manage that. Because ultimately, why do you hire a 3PL? So that we can help you manage the variability. So that's our job.
Exactly. And you've seen things go wrong in ways that brands cannot even imagine.
Yes.
And you can kind of predict or navigate them around it. So
we survived.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Laura, this has been an incredible conversation. Maybe just to close it off, if you can give a piece of advice to our audience that's listening in today on how they can navigate 2026 successfully and what's a good perspective to have as they're continuing to kind of weather the storm and maybe find their feet a little bit this year.
I think that the biggest thing for me is to not be as emotionally invested. And that's super hard, right? Because it doesn't mean that we're not passionate about the supply chain, that we don't think it's important. But if we emotionally invest in the roller coaster right now, it makes us less effective. Particularly as leaders, the team is looking to us to be the calm in the storm, to say, these are the decisions we'll take because we know. These are the decisions that we'll defer because we don't know. This is a decision we'll take because we don't know. And if we're wrong, this is what we'll do about it. I really think it's really important that we remain the calm. And that's what the merchants in our business want us to do, right? That's what the customers want us to do, is they crave that certainty. And that's the leadership shadow we have to cast.
Absolutely love that. Thank you so much again for joining. I look forward
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to see you again. Thank you.
Absolutely.